Skip, where did you go? Oh, there he is. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. Every time you do music, it's something that tells us a story. And then we have such a variety. Ken, I know you're responsible for that, but just whatever, every week it seems like we have something new and different and wonderful. And all the musicians, thank you. I really do. Guys back there. Thank you. When I get home, I thank God for you too, by the way. I bring her into it. Well, this is one of those days. Oh, and by the way, Joe, did you ever do stand-up comedy? Just thinking about that. Oh, and thank you, Pat, for the meditation too. All of you who participate in this place. It's great. I want to talk about the world inside ourselves. Do you feel like that describes the experience of whatever you're discovering in life as you go along life's pathway? Does that ring a bell or anything with anybody? Maybe after I get through today it will. Somebody's clapping back there, so good. Thank you. There was a modern philosopher who said, the life we know is a thin layer of events covering a deeper reality. I read that frequently. I've got it underlined in a book, and I just to keep reminding myself of what this is like, keep going back to this, that beyond the physical life that I'm experiencing, there's a whole other world. Now, back quite a few years ago when I was minister at the Unity of Greater Waco, well, very early in my stay there, someone came to me from the Waco Tribune. Isn't that the name? Yeah, right. And asked me if occasionally, and I would have a space that I could count on, ever so often, to write an article. Well, one day I wrote an article, and it was about this very thing I'm talking about now. And then I used a scripture that Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within you. And I built it sort of my writing around that. And so I got this letter from this irate, I think I remember Southern Baptist, I believe, somebody, that said, you mean you've built your whole religion around some obscure scripture? I think that was the exact words of the letter. It's hard to forget something like that, Of course, I realized that, living in Waco, people said that if the South was the Bible Belt, that Waco was the buckle. And I found that to be true, although we had a wonderful gathering of people there, but anytime I wrote an article, I could expect a little feedback, from other people that had their ideas. Jesus did say, though, that the kingdom of God was within you. And Eric Butterworth has a saying that I also have underlined, and it says this: we have uncovered God within ourselves. So this is sort of what is happening to us, and really all it's referring to is that besides this physical world that we live in, we also have a spiritual world, and the spiritual world isn't out here someday in heaven, but it's going on right now, and our participation in it is right now kind of stuff, It's what we're experiencing every day. And I think that in our minds sometimes, I'm thinking about myself mostly, not you. I'm mostly talking to myself, but I think that I went through a period of my life that it sort of seemed like the two were separate. That there's that spiritual life and the soul, which will meet God someday in heaven, And then there's that physical world that we've got to struggle with and face right now every day of our life, just to sort of keep bread on the table and keep the bills paid and things like that. But then there's this wonderful thing about New Thought, that once you get into it and you realize that it's all sort of mixed together, and that the spiritual is going on and a part of and reflecting on what's happening in our world. It's as though what is inside in the world inside of us is magnified when we look at what's happening outside of us. It's like there's an outforming of whatever is inside of us, an outforming. Now, so we uncovered God within ourselves. That's where we discover that the real experience is in this whole world within ourselves. There is God in every little fiber of it. Now, so what we do, we don't withdraw from the world. We keep working on this process of uncovering, and it's sort of like Columbus discovering America. That's sort of what we're doing. We're discovering a whole world and all of these things that go with it. And no matter how long a person stays in this idea of searching, not just searching, but it's, I think, discovering, in a process of discovering, it's like every day of our life we discover some new part of what Spirit is doing in our life and how Spirit is doing it. It just can go on and on. The thing, and there's a word, the magic word, and this is awareness. The difference comes in whether we're aware of what's happening or not aware. So keep that word in mind, because it certainly is something to think about, of whether we're aware. We're certainly aware of our physical world, but if we're equally aware of that spiritual world, it's not that we have to disappear. I know that there are some people that have chosen to just, it's more or less, go be a monk in a monastery or something in order to be spiritual. Not necessary. We can find a balance to where we can participate in the world every week, but still know that we are participating from a different place than maybe what we could call the ego world or the physical world. It's not that we don't have a physical world. It's not that we don't have an ego. It's just that we don't let ego take charge of our lives. It is the Christ within us that's supposed to take care and to take charge of our life. And we are directed by what we've learned. Everything that Jesus taught relates to this world that is within us. Everything. I don't think there's probably a sentence in the Gospels that they're not pointing to that particular thing of the world within us, or that which is spiritual as opposed to that which is just in the flesh. He says, you're still there. You're still there. You're just not of that, really, because that part of you that goes on forever is part of that world that is within you. Now then, what we can do is, as we begin to explore the inner world, is learn about all of the infinite possibilities that is within this world. Do you realize that your potential, as you see it, looking at it from a physical point of view, may be limited, but when you enter the inner world, you begin to realize that nothing is impossible. It gives meaning to what Jesus said when he said, nothing shall be impossible to you. He was talking about those coming from this inner world. Now, here's a saying, and this is something that has been on my mind this week. Jesus said, this is John 14:12, the person who trusts me will not only do what I am doing, but greater things than these. In other words, if he's doing miracles, if he's changing life as people understand it, the principles of life as people understand it, he said, anything that I've done, you can do. And then he added this, And this is talking about that infinite potential that is within everybody. That there's no limit except for the ones we decide upon ourselves. That's the only limitations we ever have, the ones we've chosen for ourselves. But he also said then, and this is in that same context, but that nothing shall be impossible for you. But that is part of the infinite possibilities of every person. Now then, here's another thing that it just keeps coming to me how important this is. But it is from this world within us that we send out the best signals to the universe. Is it hard to believe that every living thing is sending out signals into the universe? And that's part of what's happening as we do our thinking. If we're thinking a lot of negative stuff, and especially about ourselves, if we've got all these regrets from life that we keep harping on and giving life to, you know, something that happened way back when, an event, the only life it can have is the life we give it. That's right. Because it's a lot of things that I know personally, believe me, there's been some things that you could surely regret that's in my life. And I've chosen to say, without that happening, and this happening, and that happening, some good, some bad, all of it has brought me to where I am now. And now are those infinite possibilities. Right now. Not what I did, and not because of my age, not because of anything, but simply for right now. But what is happening then that we're trying to look at is the signals that we send out to the universe, because that's what determines so much. Because we may be sending out negative signals into the universe, negative about ourselves, negative about someone else, and not understand why negative things keep happening in our life. So think about this. The thing that's brought my attention, and when I began working on this message, I thought of a couple of incidents. I hope they're not things that I've already told, or maybe it's okay. I'll tell them again. But speaking of signals, my granddaughter that now has had her first baby and lives in Madison, Wisconsin, when she was 5 years old, we used to go to a place out on the lake. I've even forgotten the name of the place. Harbor One, yeah, that's right. And they had a wonderful brunch, and sort of like a buffet on Sunday, you know, or Saturday or whatever day it was. And so we would rent a barge and take the whole family out, and we would be on the lake. Somebody might want to fish a little, but mostly swimming out there, you know, and jumping off the top of the barge. But we came back for the brunch, and there at Harbor One was this big swimming pool. I think they've covered it up now, but then there were bushes all around it. Well, my granddaughter and I were the last to get off the boat, so we came along, and there was this egg out there, just sort of out on the dirt besides the sidewalk, and it popped, and there was this little duck. And it was just amazing watching this little guy, because he's going all this gyration, you know, and oh, Cassie was just absolutely, she was in great wonder, you might say. And so finally, when it got itself sort of together, well, she picked it up and she said, "Where's its mother?" And I said, "I don't know." I said, "There's a bunch of ducks over there in the edge of the water, and we'll see." And so we went over, and she set the duck down, and boy, those guys just took off. You can't believe how it wasn't just drifting away. They were running away. They didn't want any part of whatever it was. So we dipped it up. I put it back in her hands. And so we started walking around the edge of this thing in these bushes. And I heard this sound, and I've never heard it before, and I've never heard it since. It was sort of a little bit like a whistle. But this little duck jumped out of my granddaughter's hands and ran into those bushes. Never had been in that egg. The mother left with the rest of the ducks. And so there they were. We pushed the bushes back, and there was a whole bunch of little guys there. And that signal, and I thought, oh, that is so real to me because the signal that it puts out. I have another story about my dog, Tippy. It's passed away a few years ago, but it was sort of a strange dog, and it wasn't one of those fighters, you know. It's a border collie, but it was just one of those things. It had an accident. It got out on the highway before we left the farm and lost a leg, and then later was neutered. That we should have called it Lucky, you know. But this dog was the most loving dog. I couldn't imagine. It's a border collie. I couldn't imagine a dog. Some of you here know and have met a dog. I think I was here about 2 years before it died. But anyway, we went down to Bernie to build a house for my daughter in the hill country. She had 10 acres. But on that 10 acres, there were several buildings, like horse stables were there, but there was a giant chicken coop with a covered top, you know, the top wired in to where they couldn't fly out. And so we bought 10 little chicks that were just born. And so the person, we know nothing about them, you know, I mean, we were going to learn. But they told us, said, just find you a number 3 tub and put them in for a while, and they showed what to put in the bottom and everything. But that dog of mine now, seeing these little chicks, would stay out there. We had a light on that to keep them warm, and he would not stay away from them. He would sort of wrap himself around the tub, and every once in a while, just all constant, nearly, he was peeking in to see that everything was all right. Okay, when they got a little bigger, it was okay to let them run in the garage. And so they would follow him, and you could see a little look of distress on his face. But even if he would lay down, well, they would try to sort of push under him. You know, they were all surrounding him, and he was just like this. Well, this went on. They got big. We put them out in this thing. But to the very last day that we were there, if he pulled up to that thing, they would come running up. It's just wild, like Mama has come home, you know. And I think, how can nature get messed up? But I will tell you, that dog was sending out a signal of love. It was like he loved everybody. He even loved cats, even though they usually didn't love him back. He would go try to lick them in the face, and they would swat the daylights out of him, you know. But it was just one of those strange animals that's what he was about. When I was thinking about this, I asked, and I knew I was going to talk about my dog and about the love that the signal he sent out. I asked Frankie to bring Ace today because in that dog I feel the same thing, and she takes him to nursing homes. And I want to tell you something. This is a real thing that I'm talking about. It's not something esoteric at all. It is a very real living thing but we ourselves are sending out signals. Now, I got corrected a little bit this morning. Pat doesn't do that very often. It was in a nice way. It was in a nice way. But there was something said politically that really irritated me. And she said to me, and she was talking about both of us, she wasn't just talking about me, but she says, when we get irritated with what politicians are doing out there, we are adding to it rather than taking away from it. Let them do their thing, but let us remove ourselves from the irritation, because when we feel irritated about what's happening somewhere else, we're actually compounding the problem rather than being part of the solution. Have you ever thought of that? Because of these signals that we're sending from our inner world, we want to correct that with the right signal, saying, I'm sending you love no matter what I heard you just say. You know, I'm sending you love because that is where we are. That's what my dog was doing. It sent so much love, and little animals can feel that love. And it's just like Ace back there when he goes to a nursing home, people feel that love when that signal is there, and that's what it's about. It is the same thing about peace in the world. Do you know that our contribution to things that are happening that aren't in our control, we have very little control over what happens, say, for example, in the Middle East. All right? But here's what can happen. Now, in the world that is within us, we can create peace, a real peace within ourselves. Okay, then that is the signal. If we feel distress because of what's happening to someone else, that's the wrong signal to send into the universe. But we are sending those signals out. And so what we do from our inner world, that spiritual part of us, we create the feeling to send out that will create the solution that we want and be part of the solution. This is why creating peace within ourselves, I mean, it's like one thing for me, say like if I were praying for peace up here and then go home and have a fight with Pat, you see, I mean, that loses everything, doesn't it? If we are in conflict within ourselves, that's the signal we're sending. All right, it's sometimes hard for me to totally grasp that and remember it every day of my life, because what I certainly want to do is send the right signal out. Now, but we create peace within. Now, the world inside of us is the creator of all that happened to it, all of the outforming that comes in. So here are some things. This is where our creativity comes from. Someone was saying, and I was listening along, I can't even remember who now, but they were talking about having this gut feeling or having intuition about something. Do you know that, and I'm not very good at that. Pat's better at that than I am. She does intuition, you know, and gut feeling and all of it. And I'm trying to get better. I'm working at it. But just the facts are what I try to look at. But really, sometimes the feelings that you have within you sort of trump the, excuse me for that word, overpower the good thought that you have. See what I'm saying? We try to keep the feelings within us. I get all mixed up sometimes. I wanted to tell you about a famous American who went through this thing of self-discovery. In other words, discovering the world within himself. Nearly all of you, I think, probably studied about Henry David Thoreau. And he was, even though he was 13 or 14 years younger than Emerson, they were from the same little town in Massachusetts. And right away, Emerson became the mentor and very good friend of Thoreau. Now, Thoreau had this thing that he wrote. I hope I can get it just about right. But, well, so much for that. But it concerned the masses of people live in a world that is far below what they had hoped for. Now, that describes it, and he didn't want to live in that world. He didn't like what was happening. Somebody, there you go. Perfect. The mass of men live in quiet desperation. I think I have that written down, but you know. All right. He didn't want to live in that quiet desperation. He wanted to live beyond this. But what he did, he chose this way. He talked to Emerson, and Emerson had a place called Walden Pond. And it was out in the country, away from everything, sort of in the wilderness at that time. This is like in the 1800s. nearly to the middle of the 1800s, but not quite. But he took 2 years of his life, and all that he did was search for that inner world and what is within and what is real value of life. There would be times after he came out, now he finished Harvard, you'd think, well, he's going to be a lawyer or something, but he didn't want to do that. He wanted to write his ideas down. I wanted to share some of them with you. This is from a book he called Walden, because naming it after the place where he lived. If one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. He will put some things behind, will pass an invisible boundary. New, universal, and more liberal laws will begin to establish themselves around and within him. Or the old laws be expanded and interpreted in his favor in a more liberal sense. And he will live with the license of a higher order of being. This would be my prayer for everyone who comes through that door of this building, to somehow find that avenue to experience that of a higher being, which is what you are from the world within you. Thank you.